question for Dr. Church.
All right. It won't take a minute to ask. I don't just support and try and help out those who dissent from the ridiculous belief of Christianity and the horrible idea of vicarious redemption. In other words, the idea that by watching another person suffer, an innocent person suffer, that you could be freed not just from your debts or your sins, but your responsibilities. You could cast your sins on a scapegoat. I don't just oppose that disgusting belief. I oppose the Judaism from which it's plagiarized and the Islam that plagiarizes from it. And I give publicity and exposure whenever I can to those who were brave enough in old times to oppose this nightmarish belief. And one of the great opponents of the Islamic totalitarianism in ancient Persia was the great Omar Khayyam, perhaps the greatest poet of old Persia, whose Rubaiyat, I'm sure, is known at least to some of you. And my favorite verse of this comes from the Robert Le Gallienne translation, and it takes the form of a question. The quatrain is in the form of a question. It says, "And do you think that unto such as you, a maggot-minded, starved, fanatic crew, God gave a secret and denied it me? Well, well, what matters it? Believe that too." To this magnificent astronomer and scientist and physician and humanist of Persia, who opposed the cruel, sadistic, verminous, ignorant mullahs of his day, I borrow the question, what is your authority for saying that you know something that I don't?
Christopher, I'm giving a probability argument. As you said before, you can't disprove the existence of God, and you can't prove beyond any doubt that there's a God. I'm giving probability. I'm giving cosmological, teleological, moral, consciousness, reason, mathematics, all of those things I listed before. It's open. The evidence is open to everybody. And this is related to your 70,000 years point that you just made there. From a Christian perspective, God has always had a revelation, even before Christ. It talks about the fact that God has always had a witness. There's three witnesses. There's creation. Everyone has creation. There's conscience. Everyone has conscience. And there's Christ. Now, Christ, true, only came 2,000 years ago. But his sacrifice of atonement, his sacrifice of atonement is retroactive to everybody that lived before him. So he's always had a witness. It is quite convenient, and that is the very nature of God. You're absolutely correct.
Well, I got him to say it. You see, if we were only discussing ontological questions, that would be all very well, and it could be quite amusing. I could say that you require a higher degree of standard of proof for your proposition than I perhaps do for mine, and you'd probably accept that, and so forth, and we could go back and forth. But we'd be paltering again with the essence of the matter, which is this. The difference between the theist and the deist is as follows. The deist says, may not make sense without some kind of designer. The theist says, when I tell you what to do, Christopher, I have God on my side. The deist says, he can tell what God wants of me, what length I should shave off the end of my penis, if I'm a boy or have a male child, or off the clitoris if it's a female child. He knows to the exactitude what the proportions of that should be, what the diet should be, what the dietary laws ought to be, who I should sleep with, and in what position. And various other things. And since God doesn't ever directly appear and say, do it this way, it's done for him, and this is really convenient, by human representatives who claim to act in his name. So that's why I think your standard of proof should be a great deal higher, because if the reason this point is important to you is because it would mean real power in the only world that actually exists, which is the material world, of you over me. And you wonder why I'm not keen. I'm Christopher Hitchens, and implausible though it may seem, I want to talk about the 10 Commandments. Who am I, you may well ask, to instruct or advise you on these grave matters, but even Moses himself was a revisionist and issued at least 4 versions of the Decalogue, or the top 10, So if he can be a revisionist, well, so can I. Picture then, if you will, that I'm not just taking a blue pencil, but an actual chisel, and seeing if these tablets of stone could possibly stand a bit of an update for our time. Numbers 1 and 2 actually don't have anything to do with ethics at all. They are injunctions. They remind or instruct you that I am the Lord thy God, that thou shalt have no other gods before me, and they forbid the making of graven images. The commandment against the making of graven images, or images of God, is very upsetting to many Catholics who often leave this bit of the commandment out, because where would Christian art and devotional painting be if you couldn't make impressive images of God, his son, his son's mother? Then we are rather sternly ordered not to take the name of this God in vain, and it's then added rather superfluously that you won't be held guiltless if you do take the name of this Lord in vain. Well, no one has ever worked out exactly how to obey this commandment. Is it taking the Lord's name in vain to shout, God is great, while blowing yourself up and killing innocent people? Some say it's obedience to the law of God. When I say God knows, I really mean I think that nobody knows. It's usually wise when promulgating eternal laws to be clear about what you mean. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The Christians who want this inscribed in courtrooms and in schoolrooms would end up taking Saturday off rather than Sunday, because this program of commandments is actually a program for the establishment of a fundamentalist Jewish state. Commandment number 5 enjoins that thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother, which seems reasonable enough. It's an interesting commandment because when given in full, it says that if you do so, you will have a longer tenure of the land that's been promised to you. It's one of the few commandments that comes with an inducement, if you will. It even seems to suggest that you should honor your father and mother because you expect a legacy from them. Number 6, thou shalt not kill. Almost immediately after the events at Sinai and the delivery of these instructions by God from the top of the mountain, Moses orders all his supporters to draw their swords and kill all their friends and brothers for their profanity. Number 7, thou shalt not commit adultery. The Turkish government, an Islamic party, recently tried to make this actual law in Turkey itself, but failed. It's difficult to see why this well-known offense should be classified with murder and theft and perjury. Usually the punishment for those who commit it is what you might call self-inflicted. Commandment number 8, thou shalt not steal. Very little to quarrel with here. We don't know of any society that has a commandment saying it's okay to steal, or a social custom that allows it. Then we arrive at a moment of comparatively rare nuance and sophistication. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. The idea of convicting someone who is innocent by bearing false testimony against them is and should be shocking to the entire human conscience. So this is not only one of the finest of the commandments, maybe the finest, but in its stress on the not and the false witness against, it shows a very rare and careful sense of the balance and scruple that's required for judgment and justice. The last of, at least this version of the Ten Commandments, is also sometimes famous by its number 10. It forbids the coveting of your neighbor's or thy neighbor's goods, these to include his ox, his ass, his wife. I think there may be 3 thinkable objections here. First, and most obvious, it considers the female of the human species to be equivalent to the chattel. Second, by way of objection, it's the only commandment that punishes thought. Here you're not forbidden to do anything. You're forbidden to think even about something. And third, the attempt to suppress an instinct, a desire that must have been put by God into us in the first place. Otherwise, how would we know? The essential division of opinion is this: did God make men, or did men make many gods? There are enough discrepancies just in the well-known version for us to be certain that we're looking here at a God who improvises, who's jealous, who's short of temper, who's inconsistent, or, if by any chance God didn't make Moses and the Hebrews, that the people who made God were jealous, short-tempered, inconsistent, and capricious in their turn. I don't know about you, but as between the consideration that man was made by God or that many gods were made by men, I've never thought there was much doubt as to which was the correct version. How might a Decalogue look if it was written for the 21st century? I never quite trust myself beginning a sentence by saying, "Thou shalt not," but let's see if we can adapt this famous question. Number one, do not condemn people on the basis of their ethnicity or their color. Number two, do not ever even think of using people as private property or as owned or as slaves. Three, despise those who use violence or the threat of it in sexual relations. Number four, hide your face and weep if you dare to harm a child. Number five, do not condemn people for their inborn nature. Why would God create so many homosexuals only in order to torture and destroy them? Number six, be aware that you too are an animal and dependent on the web of nature. Try and think and act accordingly. Number seven, don't imagine that you can escape judgment if you rob people with a false prospectus rather than with a knife. Number eight, turn off that fucking cell phone. You can have no idea how unimportant your call is to us. Number nine, denounce all jihadists and crusaders for what they are: psychopathic criminals with ugly delusions and terrible sexual repressions. Number 10, be willing to renounce any god or any faith if any holy commandments should contradict any of the above. In short, don't swallow your moral code in tablet form.
Debate, I think, as well, to confront one of the four horsemen in a very influential movement who's had a bestseller.
Yes, I think it was strategic in that sense, Kevin. Initially, I was reluctant to do this debate because I have had pretty negative experiences in the past debating with people who are not themselves scholars. You can't argue with someone who doesn't understand logic, who doesn't understand that they have just made an incoherent statement or that their conclusions don't follow from their premises. Argumentation is almost futile with someone who doesn't understand argument. So I've had some less than pleasant debates with graduate students or lawyers in the past where they just weren't very good debates. And so I didn't really want to do this thing with Hitchens. But the folks at Biola just pressed me very hard and said he's a prominent spokesman for the new atheism, and it would be very important for someone to debate him and just to really expose the superficiality and the emptiness of his rhetoric. And so for that reason I did take it on, and I'm glad that I did. I thought the debate went well.
The Frank Zindler debate that you did in Chicago is similar to this because Frank Zindler was considered to be unbeatable when it came to debating, and that if you just really wanted to put the Christian in his place, bring in Zindler from the American Atheist, because he would just mop the floor with you. In fact, Ravi Zacharias was told that. He said,
really?
you know, I tell you what we'll do. You think you know you can debate? We'll put Zindler up against you. And,
yeah, I remember when they were looking for the atheist opponent for that debate, and they picked Zindler. And Lee Strobel and Mark Middleburg said, well, can't you get a bona fide scholar, someone who is more credentialed? And Rob Sherman, the American Atheist fellow, said, oh, no. He said, this is our man. This is the guy that we want to do this. And as I watched videos in preparation for that debate, it turned out that Zindler could be a formidable opponent. I saw him debate some Christians, and he really took them to pieces. So that was a kind of similar confrontation in that this was a popularizer sort of fellow who could be rhetorically effective. It was also similar in another sense, Kevin. I think these were the two most widely disseminated or broadcast debates that I've been in. Both of them had huge audiences live of several thousand people, and then both of them were also being simultaneously broadcast, either through radio or internet, just all around the country and even in foreign nations. So they were very similar in that sense as well.
Let me just say you were extremely successful in that debate, and that, again, was strategic because it put to rest this idea that no one could beat this American atheist spokesperson and who did not make a good showing in this debate. And I think that launched a lot of things for reasonable faith in that Zondervan published that, and a lot of people picked that up in bookstores and things like that, and have watched
That's
that
the
debate.
great thing about these recordings is that they have a life of their own long after the event is gone and forgotten. People in Australia have been watching the Zindler debate, as you say, and now this Hitchens debate as well, being professionally recorded by Illustra Media, should go out just all over.
Well, some comments on the debate then.
Well, I had a little bit of fun with the debate because 2 weeks before the debate, I was on a panel discussion with Christopher Hitchens in Dallas at this Christian book exposition. And on the panel were Doug Wilson and Lee Strobel as well, and some other folks. And I had the last word in this panel discussion and was able to summarize, I think, 10 arguments that the theists on the panel had presented for Christian theism. And opposed to that was just one argument that Christopher Hitchens had offered, and even that, he admitted, was answered if you take a Christian theological perspective. So he really had nothing to stand on. So he was seated right to my left, immediately at my left elbow. So I turned to him and I said, now in 2 weeks we're going to be debating these issues at Biola University, and I hope that you'll use that time to do a little homework so that we can have a more substantive discussion when we meet. And I was just needling him a little bit, kind of teasing him. And unfortunately, he didn't use those 2 weeks to do much homework, I'm afraid.
Well, he
because the discussion wasn't any better.
No, and he depends on his rhetorical skill. He is a wordsmith, and he's awesome to listen to. You want to let him talk because he's so interesting and he has such a way with words. What we have to do, however, is look beyond that and see if there's any substance to
and that's hard for many people to do, Kevin. You hear that British accent, and it sounds so urbane and so intelligent. And then, as you say, the rhetoric, the comparisons of God to a North Korean dictator, things of this sort, they're very visual images and makes him for an engaging speaker, as you say. And it's hard for people to actually look beyond that and assess the substance of the argument.
He came over to a table where I was sitting after the panel discussion that you're referring to, and he remarked along the lines of, I'm rather surprised at this new trend in Christianity of actually having facts and evidence to back up what you believe. He says, I thought it was just about faith.
Yes. He mentioned that in one of the events that I was involved in, either the panel discussion or perhaps the debate. He thought apologetics was something new, some radical turn somehow. And I thought, my goodness, had he never heard of C.S. Lewis? As a British person, you would think he would have heard of Lewis or other great British scholars, but evidently he had not. And on the one hand, that's discouraging to think that we've had so little impact in that area. On the other hand, it is encouraging that here is a new atheist who is suddenly being confronted for the first time with argument and evidence for the Christian faith and finds this to be something new and challenging that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it could, God could use it, and this is our hope with Reasonable Faith Ministries, is that God can use that to begin to work on a person.
Oh, absolutely, Kevin. I saw in the open forum the other day an email from a fellow who had lost his faith something like 20 years ago, and when someone asked him why, he said, it was because in talking with people, I could see that the most insightful people were non-Christians, and that my reasons for believing in Christianity were all fear-based and were utterly untenable, and I just began to see I had no reasons to believe what I believe at all. And so this person walked away. And I think we can prevent that from happening if we can show Christian kids, high schoolers and others, that some of the most reflective and deep people are Christians. And the fact is, that's the truth. They really are. And that, moreover, Christianity isn't fear-based or just a leap of faith into the dark, that there are really good arguments and evidence for what we believe, and that these hold up in one-on-one, face-to-face confrontations with the best that secular atheism and agnosticism can offer.
Now, at the same time, Hitchens indicates that this, what he sees falsely as a new trend in Christianity, he thinks that it's a capitulation to science, and that the advance of science is causing Christianity to change, and if it continues in this way, then Christianity will go away and be taken over by science because the evidence is against God and so on. So, in another way, he's not very congratulatory. He's also saying, well, you're adjusting your belief to new data that is coming in, and that's going to erode your faith.
That's just, again, historically naive. If you look at, for example, the history of apologetics, you can see from Isaac Newton on prominent scientists appealing to scientific evidence, especially the Bridgewater treatises on the argument for design or the teleological argument, the Gifford lectures.
Coming now to the point that I warned Tony I wanted to stress, and we're going to talk about later, of the famous observation made by Stephen Jay Gould, wonderful biologist and paleontologist, that religion and science are non-overlapping magisteria, as he put it. There's no necessary reason why they should be in conflict. The two ideas can coexist in the same mind. I was a great admirer of Gould's, but I think I want to disagree, and here's how. Of course, a great scientist can also be a person of faith.